Hello everyone, you have come to Tata Comic Preview channel. Let read together. Have fun. However, Pan Zhong and Zhou Jifeng merely hesitated for a second. They knew their places. Both of them were like brothers in the same boat. They gave each other a motivating glance and walked over. When they walked up to Yu Shangrong, Pan Zhong said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Second." To a cultivator who pursued the path of the sword to its extremes, his sword was nothing less than his own life. Yu Shangrong would never agree to this. "Master, please. Anything but my sword." Yu Shangrong fell to his knees again. He stabbed the longevity sword to the ground. The others gasped. They did not expect the proud Yu Shangrong would act so humbly because of his sword. However, they recalled the person who had taught Yu Shangrong everything was his master after all. Zhou was more than deserving of this humble display. Pan Zhong and Zhou Jifeng did not dare to wrestle the sword from Yu Shangrong. They only looked at him helplessly, at a loss over what to do. They turned to look at Zhou and waited for further instructions. If push came to shove, they would take it by force. Indeed, a sword was important, but it did not warrant such a huge reaction. Zhou looked at the kneeling Yu Shangrong and said, "You rely on your longevity sword too much, so much so that your progress with the sword has stagnated." Yu Shangrong looked at the ground as he said, "My sword path isn't limited by my weapon, but by my golden lotus. Master, please. Anything but my sword." Based on his voice, it was clear that his emotions were agitated. Zhou looked at Yu Shangrong and said, "I'll give you another chance. If you can best me, you can keep the sword." The others shook their heads. How was Yu Shangrong supposed to best Zhou? The gap between them was like an uncrossable chasm. This was not a chance at all. It was just another way to reject Yu Shangrong. Yu Shangrong looked at his longevity sword. He wielded it. His current feelings were no different from what Duanmu Sheng felt a moment ago. He knew he would fail, but he had to try anyway. He charged with his sword in hand. He used the simplest and most precise moves as he charged forward at lightning speed. Without the use of primal chi, it was a competition of techniques. Yu Shangrong stabbed the sword forward. Zhou struck the flat of the blade with his palm. Stab, strike. Stab, hit, point, lift, hack. Yu Shangrong unleashed all the possible moves that he could think of. His movements were a blur. With just his movements alone, he stirred up a gentle breeze. He appeared confident and graceful. The Guiyuan sword techniques sutra surfaced in his mind at this moment. At first, the sword was like a shadow. Then, it was like the wind. In the end, it was like a tempest. Zhou remained calm as he struck with his palm. It was as if he had personally experienced the 1,000 years of cultivation in his memories. Since he was the one who taught Yu Shangrong the Guiyuan sword technique, he was, naturally, not inferior to Yu Shangrong in this regard. On top of that, he knew about the advantages of the various cultivation methods. He knew which properties to keep and to discard. Although he was old, he moved much nimbly compared to people his age. Yu Shangrong was quick, but Zhou was quicker. When Yu Shangrong slowed down, Zhou slowed down as well. Every strike of Zhou's palm hit the blade of the longevity sword. The fight caused a loud commotion. The others shook their heads. They could not help but sigh. The pavilion master knows the Guiyuan sword technique too well. Mr. Second's every move is under the pavilion master's control. The others nodded in agreement. Clearly, Zhou's understanding of the Guiyuan sword technique was not inferior to Yu Shangrong. Although Zhou did not counterattack, he managed to nullify all of Yu Shangrong's advances. Mr. Second lost the moment he attacked. Hua Wudao said with a sigh, "He's no match for the pavilion master's skills to begin with." Now, his aura, confidence, and attitude are all suppressed. He's not as sharp as he's supposed to be. Bam! Zhou steeled himself this time. He exerted more force and landed a heavy blow on the blade. Yu Shangrong lost his grip and the sword fell out of his hand. It dropped onto the ground with a loud clang. The battle ended. Lu Zhou retracted his palm. He placed his hands on his back and looked at the longevity sword indifferently. The cave of reflection was silent. Although this was only a battle without primal chi, Lu Zhou had won with his technique. Even if he was given the use of his primal chi, Yu Shangrong did not stand a chance if this had been a battle to the death. The pavilion master could even seal his cultivation base. What other methods could Yu Shangrong use against him? Yu Shangrong's pride was further crushed. Master, the enter and return 3 soul. Did you hold back? Yu Shangrong asked. You still have a long way to go, from being accomplished in your sword path. Lu Zhou stroked his beard and waved his sleeve as he said, it's the same for you Zhenghai as well. Yu Shangrong. The loser would have to submit to the victor. There were no excuses for losing. Everything a victor said was right. However, Lu Zhou could tell Yu Shangrong was unwilling to accept this. Therefore, he said, the return and enter 3 soul. It has the origin radiance, majestic spirit, and the nether essence. The origin radiance is in the power of the body, the majestic spirit resides in the will and soul, while the nether essence is neither dead nor alive. On the path of Wuji, the soul is yin while the body is yang. At this juncture, Yu Shangrong said, I know that by heart. He was still proud. He took pride in remembering all of these things. Nobody doubted Yu Shangrong. After all, not many were capable of reaching the heights he did on the sword path. Since you're unwilling to accept this, I'll show you what the real sword path is like. Lu Zhou suddenly remembered everything he had learned before he transmigrated. Both of his memories have reached harmony before he even realized it. This merge gave him new insights on cultivation. Yu Shangrong was too proud. If he could not reduce that pride, he would surely pay for it in the future. After muttering to himself for some time, Lu Zhou stroked his beard and calmly said, the highest point of the sword path is besting a sword with none. Besting a sword with none? Let alone the others who were present, even Yu Shangrong was puzzled by these words. Duanmu Shang, on the other hand, suddenly remembered what he saw when the barrier shattered. His master had personally demonstrated the imperfect divine intervention sword path to him. Back then, he did not completely understand what his master was trying to show him. Hence, he listened to this more seriously than the others. There were also the 3 elders of the old age pavilion. They were instantly invigorated. They wanted to listen to what the pavilion master had to say. The others did not dare to breathe loudly. They hoped they would be able to gain some insight from this. Lu Zhou said, there are 3 levels of the sword. The first level is the commoner's sword that everyone, from the average cutlass to the princes, can use. It's nothing but a competition of cruelty and flashiness. The second level is the saint's sword. Bravery serves as its edge, loyalty as its core, and the sword path as its tip. The third level is the king's sword. Nations serve as its edge, the seas and mountains as its sharpness. It activates the 5 elements, opens with yin and yang, wields spring and summer, moves with autumn and winter. It's peerless, and the world bends its knee to it. This is the same for the saber. Everyone was silent as they listened attentively. Lu Zhou's voice was the only sound in the area. This is the Taoist view of things. You're using the sword path as your tip. That's the second level, at most. A complicated expression appeared on Yu Shangrong's face. Based on these words, since his eldest senior brother, Zhenghai, wanted to reign over the lands, did this mean his senior brother's saber was on the 3rd level? Lu Zhou saw the change in Yu Shangrong's expression. He knew what was in Yu Shangrong's mind. He said, Zhenghai wishes to use the nation as his edge and make the lands bow before him. However, he does not possess the ability yet. At most, he's on the 2nd level. Yu Shangrong's curiosity was immediately piqued. He asked, who's on the 3rd level, then? It can be said that the sword path genius from the northern capital, Gong Yuan'er, wielded the king's sword. Lu Zhou stroked his beard and said, the ever-living emperor, Lu Ge, wielded the king's sword as well. When the members of the old age pavilion heard this, they were puzzled. They had personally seen Gong Yuan'er's sword skill. Indeed, Gong Yuandu was shockingly impressive, and there was no doubt he was an elite among elites. Even so, they did not think Gong Yuandu would be able to defeat Yu Shangrong. There was no doubt that he was a top elite. Why would the pavilion master list Gong Yuandu as a person of the third level? The ever-living Emperor Lu Gu ruled over the lands with his sword. Indeed, he wielded a king's sword. However, these two people were dead. Was it not too harsh to compare the living to the dead? There had been countless heroic figures in the past. Who among the living would dare claim that they were superior? Before Yu Shangrong could reply, Hua Wudao could no longer suppress his curiosity and blurted, "Pavilion Master, if that's the case, does this mean the current emperor, the Evergreen Emperor, wields a king's sword as well?" Lu Zhou stroked his beard and shook his head. Not quite. Kindly enlighten us, Pavilion Master. Hua Wudao bowed. The ever-living emperor had conquered nations and founded Great Yen. The Evergreen Emperor merely inherited the throne. He can't be regarded as wielding the king's sword yet. I see. Hua Wudao stepped back. Lang Luo could not help but say, it's true that Gong Yuandu from the northern capital was an elite, but he was only a rogue cultivator and had never conquered nations or founded a country. For the entire century or so before his demise, he had been hiding inside a coffin. Why would he be regarded as wielding a king's sword? Everyone else had the same question in their minds. They stared at Lu Zhou eagerly, anticipating his answer. Lu Zhou stroked his beard gently and replied in a light tone, fighting for your own life against the heavens and the earth and being fearless of death. His tone turned pointed as he looked at the others indifferently. Why did none of them enter the nine-leaf stage up until now? If they did, they would have been enlightened and deemed worthy of wielding a king's sword. However, Gong Yuandu was not the only person who fell on this path. Over the millennia, many magnificent cultivators had died on this path as well. Pan Litian asked, there are many who fought for their lives against the heavens. Are they all deemed worthy of wielding a king's sword? Lu Zhou stroked his beard and nodded ambiguously. The others were stunned at first. Then, they finally understood Lu Zhou's words. When he heard this, Yu Shangrong lowered his head. The sword path that he prided himself on was not even at the third level in his master's eyes. He had no retort for this. His master was right. At the end of the day, his sword was but a tool for him to flaunt his sword skills. He was no different from a martial artist. Lu Zhou glanced at Yu Shangrong. You're a young man, after all. If I can't even handle you, I would have spent the past millennium in vain. He continued to say, regardless if it's the Taoist sect or the Confucian school, they're not the greatest realm. The others looked at Lu Zhou in confusion. The sword path was already categorized into 3 levels, and yet, they were not the greatest in the pavilion's master's view. Having no sword is better than having a sword. Anything the mind can think of can be turned into a sword. Water benefits all things, and yet, it's not unyielding. It adapts to everything around itself. Lu Zhou stared at Yu Shangrong. Then, he raised his right hand. An energy blade formed between his index and middle finger. Suddenly, the energy blade split into 2 and multiplied. The tree before the cave of reflection shook as well as the leaves shot out. Whoosh! 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 The tree leaves stabbed into the ground. This was not the end. Everyone felt a gust of wind dislodge the leaves. Even the wind felt like a blade, stinging their faces as it blew at them. Fortunately, they were all cultivators who had undergone body tempering. They were capable of resisting this weak power. Even so, the pavilion master's demonstration made them understand what he meant by having no sword was better than having one. Although they understood the theory behind it, how many could actually pull it off? Not only did it require extremely precise control over primal chi, one would have to be capable of stirring up the leaves and wind while condensing primal chi. It was an almost impossible feat without cultivating or training for 100 years. Yu Shangrong usually relied on the longevity sword, so he had never trained in this manner. Therefore, he accepted his defeat. A person's attitude would determine the height of one's sword. The strength of a person's sword path was determined by one's understanding of the sword. Lu Zhou's current lesson had completely destroyed Yu Shangrong's views. Well, it was only natural since Lu Zhou was his master. Can you accept this? Lu Zhou stared at him. I've been enlightened. Yu Shangrong had mixed feelings in his heart. He wondered what his master was thinking. He remembered that his master had never taught them so patiently when they had just joined the pavilion. Who else could tell him these things apart from his master? Ding. Disciplined Yu Shangrong. Reward, 500 merit points. Ding. Taught Duanmu Sheng. Reward, 200 merit points. Lu Zhou noticed the different words used by the system. One was disciplined while the other one was taught. Lu Zhou suddenly recalled one of his forgotten memories. It had something to do with Yu Shangrong's question and worries about how he might kill Yu Shangrong. It was as though Yu Shangrong was afraid of the past repeating itself and was unwilling to mention the past as a result. He knew there was no forcing this. He lost himself in thought for a moment before he finally said, "Reflect on your actions inside the cave of reflection." After Lu Zhou finished speaking, he turned around with his hands on his back and walked toward the evil side pavilion. However, he did not take Yu Shangrong's longevity sword with him. Elder Lang, Elder Hua, Elder Pan. Lang Luo, Pan Litian, and Hua Wudao cupped their fists and followed. The moment the 4 members of the old age pavilion left, the stifling atmosphere eased. The others exhaled with relief. Yu Shangrong looked at his masters retreating back. At some point, he did not even know when, his palms were moist with cold sweat. Zhu Honggong kept his head lowered. When Zhu Honggong was about to leave, Yu Shangrong said tonelessly, "Old Eighth." Huh? Zhu Honggong stopped in his tracks and shuddered. Come here. Second senior brother. I live in the southern pavilion now. Yu Shangrong was in no hurry to enter the cave of reflection. Instead, he walked up to Zhu Honggong and said, "There's no need to feel nervous." He sounded as gentle and humble as usual. He recalled the sight he saw in Radiant Cloud Forest when his master unleashed the Enter and returned 3 souls on Witzard's back. He asked, "Tell me honestly, is master at the 9-leaf stage now?" Huh? Zhu Honggong was stunned. 9-leaf? Yu Shangrong did not ask this without due reason. He knew that he had his own unique understanding and mastery of the sword path. Although he knew he would not be a match for his master, he should not have lost by such a huge margin. There was only one possibility left: his master must have already entered the 9-leaf stage. That can't be. Second senior brother, there's no such thing as the 9-leaf stage. I don't know anything. Don't give me that look, I truly have no idea. Zhu Honggong kept waving his hands. Yu Shangrong pondered this silently. Fighting for one's life against the heavens was part of wielding a king's sword. However, without losing one's life, how was one supposed to enter the 3rd level? He recalled Si Wuya's words. Perhaps, his master had found a way to overcome the great limit. That must be why his master had such enlightening remarks. In the Evil Sky Pavilion's Great Hall, Lu Zhou, Lang Luo, Pan Litian, and Hua Wudao were the only ones present. Lu Zhou walked into the hall and sat down slowly. He said, "Sit." The other 3 took a seat. I believe that all of you are knowledgeable elders. Do you know about the Melilot? Lang Luo said, "I've heard of it. It's said that the Melilot grows on Brackish Mountain. No other plants can grow there as it's covered in snow throughout the year.